You have what you call general partners and you have limited partners. The general partners are the people who are basically running the fund. They're raising money. And then you have what are called limited partners. So they're the people putting the money into the fund. I specifically picked stage 2 because their particular investment strategy, they're a venture capitalist fund. So they're investing in startups and they're specifically trying to raise money from limited partners, from LPs that are go-to-market leaders at other startups.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Cloud Gambit. With me is my co-host Yvonne, who just got done traveling. How was your trip, Yvonne?
Yeah, just got back from Google Cloud Next, where we talked about AI all week, and lots of customers were excited and had some great conversations about, even more, day-to-day topics like workload migration and cloud foundations and all of that. So it was a good week. Glad to be
So,
home, though.
were you excited to talk about AI all week?
I think so. I mean, it's always interesting to see what's coming, and we know that it's going to change the world. And so, yeah, it's
I
always
dig
fun to
it.
talk about what could be.
Awesome. Any traveling difficulty, by the way, or was it all smooth?
It was pretty smooth. Yeah. I booked direct flights, which is always a good trick. And yeah, what I will say is I drove through some pretty good Kentucky flooding to get to the airport, but after that, it was good. Had a lot of water here this spring.
Yeah, lots of that to go around. Well, anyway, with us was is Justin, who was actually recently in Kentucky as well, doing some sightseeing. And we had both of us, Yvonne and myself, both had the privilege to hang out with Justin at a US and UA event not too long ago in Lexington, Kentucky, of all places. But how are you doing today, Justin?
I'm doing well, doing well. I actually missed out on Google Cloud Next because I was in Kentucky. We were in opposite places yet at the same time, Yvonne. So
Yeah. Hey, the Bourbon Trail is always a good thing.
it is fun. Yeah, and like you said, lot of water in Kentucky, a lot of flooding. It was amazing just in the few days we were there how quickly it receded, though.
Yeah.
Yeah, I my whole backyard was pretty much flooded. We have a creek that runs through the back of our property. That thing was like a river. It was crazy. My son actually we have one of those like toddler plastic play pools, like the round ones. Like he threw that sucker in there and jumped in and just went. I'm like, yeah, don't do that. You could get hurt. It's a little too vicious to be doing that right now. So good times. But anyway, thank you so much for joining us. I think we frequent a lot of the same circles. I feel like I see you at pretty much every conference I go to. reInvent. We ran into each other at reInvent recently. Was that last year? Yeah, last reInvent.
Yep. That was in December in Vegas. Yep.
Yeah. Most of the network automation forum conferences, all sorts of stuff. But
Yep.
yeah, you've been up to a lot of interesting things lately. But before we get into the topics of the conversation, do you want to just give us a little bit about your background? Just kind of when you started in tech, it doesn't have to be too deep, but just a summary.
Sure. I'd say the summary of my background came up through the networking silo. I'm old enough to have started before there really were silos, but as people kind of specialized in IT or in technology, networking was what I was passionate about. So I spent a lot of time doing that. And like you said, I now spend my days going to a lot of these conferences and doing either public speaking engagements or helping us staff booths and so forth. My current job title is Field CTO with an organization called Kentik, and we do some cloud related stuff and some traditional network related stuff, doing what we call network observability.
Field CTO. As Yvonne asked a little while ago, what in the heck is a field CTO?
Yeah, I find it's about 50-50 when I introduce myself, whether people know what that means or not. So I'll explain. Like a lot of jobs in tech, it means different things in different companies. But the way we defined it at Kentik is I do a little bit of brand awareness and thought leadership. So doing some blogs and podcast and public speaking engagements at events. Um, do a bit of executive involvement with our customers. So building some executive relationships with some of our key buyers. Really, what that comes down to is translating from one engagement to another, the use cases for our product and how customers have found success out of our product in the past. So, for example, if I'm at reInvent where you and I ran into each other, William, and I talk to 5 different customers, I start to pick out themes from those conversations that I can then bring to other executives at our customers and say, hey, I've heard from 2 or 3, 4 other customers that they use the product like this. They're really getting value. This is where they're helping save money or they're helping be more efficient in how they run their operations by implementing the product in this way. So it kind of helps me be able to bring some value to those conversations, which is really what the executives are looking for, is to be able to not just understand, your product and how the widgets work, but how are they really going to have a successful business outcome from that?
Gotcha. So that sounds like it rolls up under like sales, the sales
Yeah, it does.
organization usually.
Yeah. Yeah, it rolls into the sales organization. I'm peers at our particular company, peers with the VP of sales, but help him kind of drive revenue, right?
Well, and that's a really important role, frankly. Like our selling peers, like they play an important job and they're kind of willing to go out and beat the bushes and spark a lot of those initial conversations, and they're willing to hear no a lot. And it is an important and valuable role. But the technical peer of the sales leader is really the person who brings trust and credibility to the product and is able to say, to validate the stories that the salespeople tell in a way that's going to resonate with a technical audience. Because at the end of the day, the thing that you're selling has to work. And the job of, technical sales leaders is to validate that. And it's a pretty important thing to do, to be able to put um reality to a lot of the stories that our friends and peers over in sales tell. My accent's getting the best of me here.
Yeah, and I
Big
think what
Kentucky.
yeah, it must be. I think what we're seeing is the economy, tightens up a little bit. Interest rates are high. There's a lot more pressure than ever on the CFOs to make sure that if they're going to invest money in buying, something from a vendor, that they're going to have a successful outcome. They're going to have an ROI for that spend, right? And so, more and more sales folks, as you're saying, are having to have conversations around, well, I understand how the product works. I understand what we're trying to accomplish. Like, what's the business outcome? How is this going to help me? Where's my ROI going to come from this? And sometimes with things like, public cloud, it may be obvious because they're going to be able to shut down a data center, or they're going to be able to be more efficient with their operations. They're going to be able to scale faster. Some of those are obvious. Some products are a little bit less obvious. And, unfortunately, my employer, their products like that. It's a very highly technical sale and it's not as big a brand, household name and so forth. So not every executive understands what they may be able to get out of our product. So that's where myself and my team come in.
Makes sense. How would you so you're I've done some work with one of your counterparts, Phil Gervasi, and uh how would you differentiate like what a field CTO does with a tech evangelist? Is like one facing community and one is facing customers, but they're kind of sort of doing the same thing, different lens?
Yeah, there's definitely, like, if you think of it from a Venn diagram, there's definitely some overlap. So Phil and our technical evangelist team, they report into marketing officially, right? And so they're doing a lot of that brand awareness and thought leadership as well that I was talking about. They're helping us build pipeline, right? So they're trying to build awareness in the community that we're out there, that our product exists, so that our sales teams could have very initial conversations with our customers. That's really what they're measured and compensated on, is driving what we call top of funnel leads, um, and getting more interest in the top of funnel. Where my role comes in, I do a lot of the same type of tasks when it comes to the external facing brand awareness stuff, but it's more to, let's say kind of mid funnel, more with existing opportunities. We're already engaging with customers or with existing customers, helping them get more value out of our product, helping them expand the usage of our product to get more value out of it. So yeah, there's definitely some overlap, and I work pretty closely with Phil and the rest of our tech evangelism team. We share a lot of ideas and content and so forth, and collaborate on a lot of that.
Gotcha. So sometime, and thank you. That was a really good explanation, by the way. That's one thing. I was actually reading a blog the other day about the trying to pick apart the differences between all the different evangelists, sales, field CTO type. A lot of these are new titles or new roles that didn't exist
For sure.
that
Yep.
long ago. So it can kind of be confusing.
For sure.
But sometime earlier last year, I think it was last year, you mentioned or you made an announcement on LinkedIn that you were, joining Stage 2 Capital is as an LP. And well, actually, I don't want to get too ahead of myself here, but um, do you want to just start, like, before we get into the details, by defining what a limited partner is in venture in the first place? That might be helpful.
Yeah, sure. So we'll come back to venture capital in just a second. But the way I'll say the SEC defines private money funds, there's a specific designation, which I don't remember off the top of my head. When you're setting up one of those type of private money funds, you have what you call general partners and you have limited partners. The general partners are the people who are basically running the fund. They're raising money from private investors to go and invest that money one way or another to get returns. Could be that they're investing in real estate by buying properties, could be that they're investing in data centers. We hear a lot of money about like companies like BlackRock investing in AI. They could be doing some stuff like that. There's a lot of different ways they could be investing that money, but the general partners are the ones running that private money fund. You think of it as like the fund manager in a mutual fund is probably the easiest way to think about it. And then you have what are called limited partners. So they're the people putting the money into the fund, and they can have all kinds of different relationships with the fund. Some of them can be just like, hey, I'm giving you my money. I'm trusting that you as a general partner are going to return my money to me plus interest. And they're pretty hands off. I specifically picked Stage 2 because their particular investment strategy, they're a venture capitalist fund. So they're investing in startups and they're specifically trying to raise money from limited partners, from LPs that are go to market leaders at other startups. So they're going out trying to find people to invest in their fund that not only can obviously give them some money that they can then turn around and invest in these startups, but also people who can invest some time based on their experience to help coach their portfolio companies. So help with their CEOs and say, hey, you've been successful before as a field CTO. What does that look like to build a field CTO team? Or prior to this role, I actually helped build the SE team here at Kentik, right? The solution engineering team. Like, how do you build out and scale a solution engineering team at a modern SaaS company? There's a lot of, as a founder, there's a lot of things that people who are founding a company just don't know because they don't have the experience, right? And surrounding themselves with people who've been there and done that and understand they're going to need to do to be successful and can give them some coaching is what Stage 2 is trying to accomplish with their LP network.
So you're basically blending together basically the venture capital aspect of it, but also the go to market and coaching. Because let's be real, if you're working for a startup and you want to increase sales, the way to do that is to not quadruple your sales team and just do that and like nothing else. Like there's other things that you might want to pay attention to. So you're taking that.
Yeah, if only it were that easy.
Yeah.
4x the reps equals 4x the revenue. If only it were that easy. Unfortunately, it's a little more nuanced than that, right? There's things, like they call product market fit, right? Where you got to make sure that your products evolve to a phase where there are repeatable use cases and there's a repeatable motion that you can train all those salespeople you're going to hire to scale up. So there's a lot of different aspects to that, you know, founders need some help and coaching in a lot of areas.
Well, and so you mentioned product market fit. What's the sweet spot there for Kentik? Like, what's your ideal customer? Where does Kentik make the most sense? How do you see that playing out in the market?
Yeah, so like I said earlier, we're a network observability platform, and what that means is we can ingest data from a lot of different networks. And so the way we really differentiate ourselves is the variety of different networks that we can ingest data from. So we can do traditional data center networks, we can do enterprise SD-WAN environments, we can do I call it the big four cloud providers. So Amazon, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud, and Oracle Cloud. We can ingest, they all call it something slightly different, but it's essentially VPC flow logs. It's telemetry data about the traffic that's flowing through those networks into our product. We do the same thing for service provider on large, big carrier networks. So we can provide them, network observability around the traffic that's flowing in those environments. So there are some performance use cases. Obviously, there's some planning use cases. There's some security use cases that customers can use our product for.
Talking about like, there's a lot of stuff when you say observability, there's a lot of like changes with observability like over the past few years. I mean, especially with like public cloud, um, the CNCF, open telemetry, kind of like setting a framework or a baseline of where some vendors begin building on, as far as the technology is concerned. But do you like one question that I have just out of the gate is like, do you see a big difference? Because like Kentik is framed as like network observability, like that's the focus, that's the essence of what Kentik does. But do you see a lot of like overlap with cloud stuff or cloud products, or cloud products just different, because they're really giving you observability wrapped up for different things other than the network?
Yeah, I mean, again, like most things in tech, right? There's a Venn diagram. What we find with a lot of our customers is the cloud native product offerings, depending on the particular cloud we're talking about. Some are more mature than others, some are better than others. But the reality is most of them are really only looking after their own cloud network, right? So if I'm going to go log into Amazon's portal, they have CloudWatch, right? And CloudWatch does a great job for customers who are only in CloudWatch. But if they have, this is a specific example from a customer that I was talking to here a while back. They have a data center that's using Cisco's, I forget what they call their SDN product in their data center, but they have their own portal, right, where they can see their data center fabric. They can see all the applications deployed on data center fabric. They have a portal. They can log in. They can see all that telemetry. But if they have an application that's in there that's going across their SD-WAN and terminating in AWS, they have three different portals they got to log into to look at that data. They got to look at it in their data center, and they got to look at it on their SD-WAN, and they got to look at it in AWS to troubleshoot it. What the approach that we've really taken is like, let's pull all that data into, sorry, I'm going to use a marketing term, single pane of glass, so the customers can see across, I guess you would call that hybrid cloud, right? But multi clouds and other use case we see with a lot of customers where they have some workloads in Google and some in Amazon, and there's traffic flowing between them, and they need to be able to do troubleshooting. They need to be able to see the traffic that's traversing both those clouds so that they have full visibility of all of their traffic across all the various different environments. And that's typically really difficult to do, or near or impossible to do, just using the tools that any given cloud provider provides.
So is that the pain point right there? So being a field CTO, I'm sure you're privy to all sorts of customer pain points. I'd imagine. So do you like, is visibility the main thing, or are there other like big pain points just kind of that you see as trending across the board with, customers?
I mean, at the end of the day, it all comes back to the visibility, right? And the reason that they care about that visibility is going to differ from customer to customer and what they're dealing with and how, I mean, even which team engaged us, right? And so if I were to break it down the next layer deep of details, what I would say is it comes down to one of three things: either performance, cost, or security, right? So a lot of times when we get just cloud customers specifically to come to us, they have migrated to the public cloud. Their dev team probably started that initiative. The networking team was brought in late in the game, and so it wasn't well architected. And so they're spending a lot of money on the cloud environment, maybe a lot more than they planned on, a lot more than they hoped for. And they want to be able to see all their cloud traffic to be able to figure out how to re-architect the network to be more cost effective, right? that kind of dovetails into performance. Those are kind of two sides of the same coin, right? If it's not well architected, if it wasn't well designed, you're going to have some performance implications from that as well. And then the third one is around security, right? A lot of companies, if they had a traditional perimeter firewall type of security posture, when they migrate applications to the public cloud, it's a lot harder to figure out whether the security posture is being enforced correctly, right? And so being able to see across all those environments, see what's traversing it, see what's being accepted, see what's being rejected, even be able to get proactive alerts when something that used to be accepted is now being rejected because somebody deployed a new EC2 instance or a new GCE instance and didn't update the firewall filters to allow that traffic in. There's a lot of different things around that we can help customers with.
So you guys ingest a ton of data from a ton of sources. Can you talk a little bit about how you manage that scale and availability of that data? Because that's flow data can get out of hand very quickly from a volume standpoint. So can you talk about how you handle that a bit?
Yeah, that's actually was the original problem statement for which the company was founded, right? Was this is a big data problem. So our founders had, I'll say, tried to solve this on their own when they were running networks and realized it's a lot bigger problem than they had realized and started Kentik. But we run our own, I'll say our own data centers. We lease space in a data center and have our own infrastructure that we pull the data into. And we've built our own systems that are optimized for flow data because um, flow data has very high cardinality. And what that means is like one flow record versus the next may have big differences in the various different fields that are in it. Um, the, a lot of times people want to get down to a given IP address so that, you have to store all the IP addresses that's in the flow record. So there's a lot of different challenges with, flow data, whether it's coming off traditional network or whether it's coming from the cloud versus things like S&MP or streaming telemetry that are a little more structured, I guess, in the way the data is ingested. So we ingest the data no matter which protocol we get it in from. We normalize it into our own internal format that's slightly compressed, and then we do enrichments. So we'll take in the data. I'll just use Google Cloud as an example. We'll take in VPC flow logs from Google Cloud. That'll tell us things like, source and destination IP addresses. But what a customer really wants to know is like, well, which GCE instance does that belong to, or which project does that belong to, right? And so what we can do is scrape the API to pull in that metadata and store it. So when we ingest a new flow log, we can enrich it, basically add more columns for each row that we ingest that shows that additional metadata and store that along with it. So when they go to query that data, they're able to do the query really fast. Because that's the other challenge that we see. A lot of customers who try to build their own stack is like, if you try to do that correlation at query time, your queries become really complex and really slow to return results.
Well, and so slow that the data is then not useful to you, right? If you're trying to do real-time troubleshooting or understand what's going on in the moment, querying vast volumes of data, is not easy to do unless you have very well-tuned data systems and structures to do that.
Well, one thing I was going to say is like bringing a lot of this together, something I don't even, maybe you could just educate me. I don't even know if this is like a marketing tactic with Kentik or what it is, but Doug, I can't remember his last name now for some reason. He does like the RCA stuff that he'll post on like LinkedIn.
Yeah. Doug Midori.
Th-
Yep.
Those are so good. Like I pretty
Mhm.
much read like all of them, like end to end.
Mhm.
Like they're all fantastic. How did that start? I mean, that's like a good marketing exercise for Kentik.
Oh, 100%. This goes back. He's a tech evangelist as well. So he's peers with Phil that we were talking about a little earlier, right? And again, his at the end of the day, what he's trying to do is raise awareness that that we're out here as a company, as a brand. And to your point, Doug does a fantastic job of doing postmortems. Could be on undersea cable cuts, could be on BGP hijacks or leaks that take place out on the internet. Those are the two biggest ones that he does most of his reporting on, and he does a fantastic job. It's not really even a Kentik pitch when you read them, right? It's just like, hey, Kentik has an interesting data set. We have interesting big data in our system that we can anonymize and see these things that take place on the internet that are interesting to other people who are, in the industry. And so he provides really good analysis around, a lot of these just call them internet weather things that take place, whether it's, an undersea cable that was cut either accidentally or as a as an active attack. He can see changes in that. He can see when like the internet shut down because a a political regime has shut the internet down because they're about to do a coup or there's a test coming up. There's a lot of different reasons that countries will shut down the internet in their country to knock their country offline for various different reasons. So there's a lot of really interesting, fascinating geopolitical and internet type of things that Doug's able to see. And a lot of it just comes down to looking at the BGP routing table, but some of it comes from the aggregated anonymized flow data that we have in our system as well.
Yeah, and they're so good. One of them had gotten, and this is like why I said an amazing marketing exercise. One of them had gotten picked up by like some major, like a huge tech publication. It was like referenced in there. I think it was like TechCrunch or one of those. Not
Yeah.
TechCrunch. Maybe it was TechCrunch, but that's huge. I mean, that's something that marketing teams would pay top dollar to, get featured in, on some of these pieces.
Yeah. Oh, 100%. Doug's reporting is amazing. I mean, he was actually called by the Washington Post the man who sees the internet, right? Because he can look at these different outages and he does nice reporting on what was going on during the event and how it happened and so forth. So a lot of the news outlets in this country will pick up his phone and call him when there's any type of internet outage because he's just got a reputation of doing a good job of reporting on this stuff. And you asked, I don't think I fully answered your original question, William, which is you asked how this gets started. Um, Doug was before Kentik at another company called Renesys, who was ultimately acquired by Dyn, and then they were acquired by Oracle, and they did BGP route table analysis. And so that's kind of how he got started. Was way back at Renesys doing analysis of the BGP table just to find these type of trends in the industry. He's just been doing it long enough that he's built his own brand and reputation as someone who has really good knowledge on this type of thing and interesting things to say. And again, does it in a way that it provides value to people beyond just a product pitch, right? Which is really the art behind tech evangelism.
Yeah. And it's incredible too, because like now's like the best time to do that type of stuff because you have so many businesses, are starting out in the cloud. And whenever there's an outage or whenever something major happens, whether it's like a Cloudflare thing or whatever it is, okay, like something happens in the internet for some provider or multiple providers impacted could, have serious problems and everybody feels it. It's huge. Like the whole world knows about it. So coming back and saying, oh, hey, this is kind of how that happened. This was, the, order of operations of what led to, XYZ. It's huge.
It's very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, question that I have. So there are always emerging techs and trends. Like, there's open telemetry that we're hearing a ton about. There are technologies like eBPF and what emerging technologies and we can even include AI in this list. Do you see, impacting Kentek's business, how you provide observability? Are there new trends that you're incorporating into your platform? What do you, as you look to the future, where are some of the big impacts that you see and how are you, changing your business to respond to those?
I think all of those are interesting, but I'm glad you added AI because that would be my answer, right? I'm sure you heard a lot about AI last week at the Google Cloud Next conference too, right? And we're implementing it in our product too. We're still experimenting with a few use cases that we think will be really interesting for customers. The very first one was what we called Journey AI, and it's essentially using an LLM to allow customers to, in natural language, ask a question and get back a visual as a response, right? So for a long time, customers could and would have to go into our UI and navigate and build themselves basically the graphical equivalent of a query, right? Like think of it as like a Grafana dashboard, right? You can build all these different panels with all this different data and different graphs on it. But you have to know how to do all of that, right? Your C-level executive is not going to take the time to learn our UI and its nuances from every other UI that they've seen, right? So the idea is, all right, let's give them the ability to go in and say, hey, Kentik, what's going on with my network today? Why do I have a performance issue? And for us to be able to go and turn that into a query using basically an API into a couple different LLMs. We have a couple of them that they can choose as an option. So that was our first foray. Actually works amazingly well. But we want to take it a step further and say, okay, we have all this rich data across flow, across synthetic tests that we do, across all the cloud stuff we take in, all the SNMP and streaming telemetry data we take in. How do we provide faster root cause analysis, right? How do we get to the root cause of a problem faster? And so we have a new feature we've come out with called probable cause analysis, where you can basically highlight a spike in traffic in our UI, right click, and have the AI say, what's the most likely cause, of this? And of course, it's going through and looking for correlation and then the data points to say, well, at the same time that, I had this spike in traffic. I'm going to pick a bad example maybe, but like Fortnite was released a new episode, right? And so that's the increase in your OTT traffic is coming from these 3 CDNs, and those 3 CDNs are the ones delivering the primary, the majority of the traffic from this new Fortnite game that was released, right? And then being able to take in even more data to be able to get down to actually suggesting remediation is really where we want to go with this, right? Being able to say, not only can we help you figure out what was the probable cause of changes to traffic patterns in your network, but also try and suggest some things you might do to fix that, right?
Very cool.
That's really cool. Yeah.
Mhm.
Is AI a feature or a product? And like, I think for most tech companies that have been around, it's like all that Google did with Google Docs with Gemini is like really,
Mhm.
really useful. Well, it's not a new I mean, they do have new products around Gemini, of course, but it's like taking something that was already awesome, something that many people out there use, which is Gmail and Google Docs, throwing some really useful AI on it. And wow, it like, as a user of Google Docs myself all the time, some of those features are just so natural. Like once you just use them once or twice, it's like, oh, now I can't imagine my
Just
life
becomes
without
part
it.
of your workflow. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yep.
Well, yeah, and I think at some point it's not even a feature. It's just embedded in it, and we don't really see it anymore. But I think one of the powerful things I've seen um, folks do with AI, and Justin described it here, is how do we take requests in natural language, translate those so that we query our system of record, and then hand back meaningful data. And so sometimes the AI is not necessarily actually processing the data and it's not doing generative things with it. We're using it as a translation engine to help us say what we want in natural language, translate that into the technical language of our system of record to be able to turn data around. And that way you get the benefit of the generative part, the natural language translation, but you're not getting the hallucination part because you're turning this natural language into a deterministic question to your system of record, right? And then and that is where we see a ton of value coming from AI. It's like, how do I interact with my systems in a way that doesn't require me to have to speak to them in their language?
Yeah, that's a really good
Mhm.
point. And that's something that I wanted to ask. This is almost like a thought experiment, Justin, but just Yvonne kind of teed it up perfectly. I've heard, and I don't want to say three, like maybe the last month, 3 weeks to a month, two separate individuals and two separate conversations. So the first one, who's an IT leader at a big company, was talking to me about like, yeah, this AI and the networking stuff, when it figures out what the problem is, I just want it to fix it and let's go off into the sunset. And then I have another person that I'm talking to that's like, oh, I hope they never get on the hook of AI trying to actually change my network flows and changing traffic patterns and changing routes. Because, the moment something breaks is the moment we're going to have to stop using it. So these are like two really different stories. And, with the network, is we've both, or all three of us really have been very deeply embedded in network engineering for a long time. And it's, I know Yvonne and I just the other day were discussing automation. Like, wow, is it still a thing? Like, we're not automating networks still, and it's like
Why are
still
we not there yet? Yeah.
That
like
I mean, that's why AutoCon exists, right? They run twice a year for that very reason. Yeah.
exactly. So how do you frame that with this AI thing of almost like de-risk? And, we know that, like, if we go and we do something on the network that causes an outage that leads to millions of dollars in loss, then the business is going to say, hey, we don't do that thing anymore. Or, they probably are going to go to the extreme to not do that thing anymore and freeze changes or something crazy. But, like, how
Yeah,
do you
they're unlikely to take the time to understand the details of what went wrong. They're just gonna ban what they perceive as what went wrong, right?
yeah,
And
well, I got to buy Kentiks, they know, right?
yeah, right. I you know, I don't have an easy answer here. I mean, the thing I would say is just there's gonna have to be some amount of checks and balances, and you're gonna have to build a little bit of the trust over time, whether the trust is in the human beings that are writing the code or the trust is in the AI engine that's behind the scenes. I personally believe a lot of the reason that we haven't seen more automation is just it takes a little bit of time to build the systems correctly, to make sure that the bugs are ironed out, to build that level of trust with the system. And I think, we'll get there. From Kentik and from our product strategy, at the moment, we have no plans to actually make any changes on any customer's network. It's not really part of our roadmap or strategy. We have a partnership with your day job employer, William, with Itential, where we're more than happy to do some API integration with the two companies and let them handle the automation because there's a lot more that they can do to build entire workflows, build some checks into the product, and a lot of things that just aren't, at least in the near term, part of our roadmap, right? And I think that's where where a customer can really start to build some trust in AI suggesting changes at some point, maybe even going off and doing the changes. But I think the first step is just like, all right, show me what changes you would make. Yeah, that passes the sniff test. Or whoa, no, that's a hallucination. Let's not do that. Let's back that out. And a lot of that just comes to having a check in the flow chart, if you will, or in the workflow and how you build the automation.
Yeah,
Well,
I think
a
a
lot
lot of the go ahead, Yvonne, sorry.
It's just a lot of what you talk about, William, is still that old mindset where, IT leaders are like, well, something bad happens. We just have to put in a system to be sure that that never happens again. Instead of taking a more mature approach, like we've seen with SRE, where, you have an error budget and you assume that there are going to be so many failures over the course of the year and you determine how many what kind of errors your business can tolerate, and then you measure that, and you use that error budget to help meter your risk from a technology standpoint. Like, because when you've consumed all of your error budget, nope, we're not doing anything risky at all. But if you don't approach it that way, then ultimately you're going to end up in an environment where nobody ever changes anything because they're so afraid of breaking it. And you have to build a culture in your organization that allows for some degree of error. And, spoiler alert, the systems, the organizations that have built the most stable systems that have ever existed take that approach, right? They have an error budget. They don't say it's never, ever, ever going to break. They say we're going to allow this much breakage over this amount of time in these ways, and then they measure it. Right. So I think like the problem that you articulate, William, has nothing to do with AI and has everything to do with how we've run our organizations and what it is, what is it to be a healthy technology organization. And I think that's an even deeper problem that AI is not gonna solve necessarily. Unless somebody asks, like, "Hey, how do I build a very solid, stable IT organization?" It's gonna be, "Oh, well, you need site reliability engineering, and here's what you need to do," and then they actually go do it. But, Yeah,
A lot of that also has to do with building redundancy into the system, right? I mean, a lot of the ways that SREs can build those error budgets in is having a redundant, you know, pod of applications, right? This one pod dies, this other one takes over. There's some redundancy built into that. That way you can have an error budget. If you've built your network, the underlying infrastructure, to where you only have a single path, that single path is critical because there is no such thing as acceptable errors, especially like what I know in the Kentucky area, there's a lot of healthcare companies, right? It's unacceptable for an emergency room to be offline for a couple hours while you do a switch upgrade. Like that's just unacceptable, right? But if there's no redundancy in the system and you can't have that switch offline, then what do you do, right?
This is true. Yeah.
failure domains and canary deployments and all of
Oh, yeah.
those, like fundamentals that have existed and that are, we continue to iterate on best engineering practices, but those are some key ones.
You're right, though. Like both of you had great points about the redundancy and building, the whole point is building your system for failure. So then when it does fail, nobody really notices. And I don't know if I ever used this example on the podcast before, but I was up in like middle of nowhere, Canada, like middle of nowhere for a wedding, like many years ago. And there was not many applications I could reach from my phone. It was the service was like, okay. But one of the apps that worked, which is, it boggles me to this day, was Netflix. I could get Netflix and I could actually watch, TV shows and movies. And I always thought that was amazing. Like they have built their platform in such a way that like, I don't know if I've ever had a Netflix outage. It's like it's highly available and there's so much out there. Like they've been good stewards of the technology that they've built and also good evangelists for how they built it. They've published
Mhm.
so much stuff on the internet. They had this great blog. I'll find it and I'll put it in the show notes. But it was about, I remember reading it when it came out. It was about eventual consistency. Basically, being a streaming service, like when something launches, like how does that work? Um, asymmetric, symmetric data replication, AZs, cross region, active, essentially across the entire planet. It's just incredible. And it really opens up, I know it's just a streaming service and it's not like a lot of the problems that, the companies I worked for in the past are much more challenging. You have many lines of business, many different applications that do different things with different scopes and different priorities, some that might touch patients, others that might not. So those situations are much more complicated, especially in healthcare. But they've done a really great job of showing, okay, this is what's possible. If you want to put in the time, the effort, like Yvonne was talking through the SRE mentality, it's the technology's there. You just have to be able to harness it and change your culture.
Well, and the great thing about the Netflix example is, marrying what your business needs to run and what the technology, what the business can tolerate from the technology, right? Because if Netflix, I've had a stream die every now and there's probably some container crapped out on the back end, and they just, relaunched it when you try to stream again, and then everything continues to run.
Put in
And
some buffer and cached it locally on your device so that you don't even notice, which is part of the key there too.
yep, very much, very much.
It's amazing. But like we said, like, I know I'm on this because it's been such my experience. My frustration is like, yeah, there's still network devices out there that are in production that are only reachable via telnet. Yeah, that's still a thing. We're in 2025 and that's still reality. And we wonder why we can't automate our networking, and we wonder, but we have these gigantic networks full of how many vendors, how many interaction surfaces, how many different ways, and then variety. Variety can really kill some productivity. And it's not like you can flip a switch. You can't just say, okay, I'm going to refresh every campus switch or, branch device that I have. Let's go. It's not that easy.
Yeah, there has to be a business justification for doing those refreshes, right? It's not just because the CLI is old and you need a more modern one, right? You're going to have to be able to spin that to your execs on like what are the other outcomes that this is going to help us, right? And back to the conversation we were having about SRE, like if we can improve our uptime, if we can come up with business outcomes that are going to help justify the spend to refresh that equipment, that's different. But just going to your execs and saying, hey, I want to spend, millions of dollars to refresh my gear because, CLI only allows telling that thing. We're like, I don't care. That's not a business priority for me.
Yeah, exactly. And I have one thing I want to fit in here at the end. I know we're probably coming up on what should be end time here, but uh, vendor, like you have customer responsibility. Like you have to be a good steward of your network. You have to be on top of things. You have to try to set the culture and do what you can with the funds that you have. But like, where what is a vendor's role in this ecosystem? And you mentioned like our teams, kind of doing cool things together. And that's one of the reasons I like working where I work is like we we have a lot of flexibility with the way that like we secure and we just do integrations with third party stuff. Like we have full support for like, open API spec, schema, Swagger, you know, we support the different authentication mechanisms like, OAuth 2, mutual TLS, OIDC, and, on top of the basics for authentication, like, token based and such. So we have that flexibility there, to really enable, you know, environments that do have a lot of stuff that like they need integration. Like they need to be able to take the old, but also work with the new at the same time. But like, what do you see as like, how do vendors move into the future with how they think about this?
Well, I think as more and more things move to SaaS, we're going to see more and more things be API first. So a lot of the things that you described are because these vendors support Swagger definitions, right? And very well defined, very standards based API to get access to the data or to the various functions that, you know, whether it's your company or anybody else needs to be able to integrate with. And that's in contrast to some of the stuff we were talking about. The only access you have to the device is to telnet in and use, an old expect script or something more modern, that is interacting with that CLI and looking for certain returns back from it and so forth. That's going to be a very brittle and very fragile way to interact with it versus a much more modern API approach. And so the more we see these systems moving to SaaS, I think you're going to see a lot more of these integrations be possible.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, you make me laugh because I was just messing with a problem where I kept having to extend timeouts in different places. So we're like, I could get this response to go on to the next thing and this response based on the stuff that I was trying to automate. It's some things never change. But anyway, I
Once
guess
you've
we got to
dealt with
wrap
them,
now.
yeah, once you've dealt with a modern API, that stuff becomes really frustrating to deal with, right?
Yes, it does. So I guess as we wrap, where can the audience find you or connect with you if they want to, Justin?
Yeah, I'm on LinkedIn or X or Blue Sky. You can just search for Justin. Last name is Ryburn, Ryburn.